Imagine living in a world where stillness feels unbearable, where silence makes you itch, and boredom becomes a threat. This is the modern condition, not just addiction to substances, but addiction to stimulation itself. Everyone is getting more addicted nowadays. It's like we need to be stimulated every second of the day. We can't eat without YouTube. We can't wait in line without scrolling. Our brains, flooded with dopamine, are being rewired to crave constant highs and to fear the low hum of simply being. As Dr. Gabor Maté puts it, addiction is not only about surrender, it's also about control. The need for relief, for certainty, for something that soothes the chaos within. And in many cases, that something becomes power itself. When we look closely, we see that addiction is not just a personal issue. It's a societal epidemic, woven into the way we live, work, and define success. This is no longer just about drugs or alcohol. It's about the chronic inability to be alone with our own minds. We fear boredom the way ancient man feared predators. In a world of infinite speed and infinite noise, even the momentary absence of content feels unbearable. But here's the paradox. Addiction isn't just about surrendering control. It's also about seizing it. I'm here to talk to you about addiction, says Dr. Maté, and also the addiction to power. One is numbing. The other is grasping. Both are rooted in the same emptiness. Why do we crave so desperately? Why must we always be high on something? Attention, approval, achievement. Perhaps because somewhere along the way, we lost our sense of being enough without it. In this world of quick fixes and constant input, maybe the real revolution is this: to reclaim the power of stillness, to choose presence over performance, wholeness over stimulation. So I ask you, what would it look like today to not run from boredom, but to sit with it? What might you discover in the silence your addiction was trying to drown out? Building on that insight, Dr. Maté offers a radically compassionate definition. Addiction is any behavior that provides temporary relief, short-term pleasure, but in the long term causes harm, and you can't give it up despite those negative consequences. That definition breaks open our narrow view. Because now, addiction isn't just heroin, alcohol, or meth. It's workaholism. It's shopping sprees we regret. It's the obsessive hunger for status, attention, consumption, control, and all of it, every single form of addiction, grows from the same soil, an inner emptiness we're too afraid to feel. We live in a dopamine-driven world. Everything is designed to spike our pleasure centers. Social media likes, online purchases, binge-worthy content, caffeine on top of anxiety. And here's the cruel irony. The higher we chase that dopamine peak, the lower we crash. Neurobiology tells us this. When you flood the brain with stimulation, it compensates by dulling its own sensitivity, which means, over time, even the things that once brought joy, a walk, a book, a friend's voice, begin to feel flat, lifeless. The baseline keeps dropping, so we chase again. This is the dopamine trap. The more we crave pleasure, the more we feel pain. But what are we really trying to numb? The answer, Dr. Maté reminds us, is always pain. Not just physical, but emotional, the ache of disconnection, the wound of being unseen, the exhaustion of performing an identity that doesn't feel like home. We're not addicted to the thing. We're addicted to what it temporarily silences. And the most haunting part, many of the most rewarded behaviors in our culture, ambition, productivity, accumulation, are often symptoms of these silent addictions. We praise them, even as they deplete us. So maybe the question is not what are you addicted to, but what are you using that addiction to run away from? You don't heal by demonizing the behavior. You heal by understanding the pain underneath. Because when we lose our connection to ourselves, we will try to fill that space with anything, even if it destroys us. And yet, if the pain was learned, so can be the healing. If the addiction was a response to disconnection, then perhaps reconnection is the beginning of freedom. What would it look like to stop reaching outward and finally turn inward, not to run, not to numb, but to listen. Here is where Dr. Maté reframes the entire conversation. The question is not, why the addiction? But why the pain? Addiction isn't a moral failing or a lack of willpower. It's a survival strategy, a desperate attempt to escape an unbearable emotional reality. This is the radical shift we so often resist. Because it's easier to blame the substance, the screen, the habit, than it is to ask, what hurt you so deeply that you had to run from yourself to survive? Carl Jung once said, "We cannot change anything until we accept it." Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses, and in the same spirit, Krishnamurti warned, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Addiction, then, is not the disease, it is the symptom, a survival response. A soul's last attempt to self-soothe in a world that never learned to love it properly. No one chooses trauma. No child signs up to be abandoned, criticized, violated, or ignored. And yet so many of those who battle addiction were once those very children. Children whose emotional needs were unmet. Children who internalized shame instead of comfort. Children whose developing brains were flooded with stress and isolation. And as neuroscience now confirms, these early environments shape the very architecture of the brain. So when we punish the addict, what we are really doing is punishing someone who was already punished by life long before their first drink, hit, or relapse. And yet, the system, both legal and cultural, continues to treat addiction as a crime, a choice, a failure. We don't ask what happened to them. We only ask what's wrong with them. But if we truly want to heal addiction, we must reverse that question, not why the addiction, but why the pain. To understand this further, we must go back even earlier, to childhood. Dr. Gabor Maté reminds us that trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside you, as a result of what happens to you. And that trauma, if left unhealed, doesn't disappear. It becomes your coping. It becomes your craving. It becomes your compulsion to chase connection in all the wrong places. Carl Jung saw this clearly when he wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. The pain doesn't start with us, it's passed on." We inherit not only the genes of our ancestors, but the emotional residues of their wounds. Krishnamurti, too, saw the illusion. It is no sign of inner freedom to conform to a society that is profoundly sick. From these depths, addiction is no longer a mystery. It is a spiritual hunger. A hunger for safety. A hunger for presence. A hunger for touch, for validation, for warmth. In Buddhist mythology, there is the image of the hungry ghosts, beings with enormous, empty stomachs and tiny mouths. They devour everything in sight, but are never full. This is the metaphor Dr. Maté uses to describe the modern psyche. We are the hungry ghosts, trying desperately to fill an internal void with external stimulation. We eat without tasting, scroll without feeling, work without meaning, shop without need, because somewhere along the way we lost our connection to ourselves, to each other, to something sacred. Addiction is a cry for that lost connection. What if the alcoholic isn't thirsty for alcohol, but for peace? What if the workaholic isn't hungry for success, but for a sense of worth? What if the addict isn't chasing a high, but fleeing from the unbearable low of unworthiness? These are not excuses, they are insights. Because when we begin to understand addiction as an attempt, however misguided, to soothe early wounds, we stop asking, "What's wrong with you?" and start asking, "What's happened to you?" And from there, true healing can begin. Not in force or discipline, but in presence, in seeing the child within the addict, in holding space for the hurt beneath the habit. Addiction is not the enemy, disconnection is. And the question that lingers is this: what would it take to stop feeding the ghost and start nourishing the soul? But addiction doesn't always look desperate or chaotic. Sometimes it wears a suit, sometimes It leads empires. Dr. Gabor Maté challenges us to expand the lens. If addiction is about escaping inner emptiness, then what do we call our collective obsession with oil, consumerism, dominance, and growth at any cost? We condemn the heroin addict for harming their body, yet remain blind to how we're harming the planet, our communities, our souls, in service of profit and power. This is addiction, too, only on a grander scale. Power addiction, Maté argues, may be the most dangerous of all. History gives us haunting examples: Hitler, Stalin, Napoleon, Alexander. All men of small stature, all outsiders in their cultures, all carrying deep-rooted feelings of inadequacy. Their pursuit of conquest wasn't strength, it was compensation. Power became their fix, not because they were strong, but because they felt profoundly not enough. In contrast, look to Jesus, look to the Buddha. Both were offered immense worldly power, and both turned it down. Why? Because they had already discovered a deeper power within, the kind that doesn't need to dominate to feel whole. The addict of heroin and the addict of empire are so different. Both are haunted by a wound. One numbs it quietly, the other wages wars. The real question isn't who holds power, it's why they crave it. And maybe the deeper question is, what would our world look like if wholeness, not control, was the goal? And so we return to the beginning, not to close the circle, but to deepen it. The pain that isn't healed will always find a way to express itself, through addiction, through illness, through the quiet collapse of identity. But the answer is not to fix ourselves like broken machines. It's to remember who we were before the wounds, the part of us that was whole, soft, and true. Gabor Maté reminds us that the light we're searching for, the one we chase through power, pleasure, or perfection, has never been outside of us. It lives within. It always has. The modern world has convinced us that we must become someone, compete endlessly, produce more, consume more, control more. But that very pressure is what distorts us, turning human souls into shells. We end up mistaking numbness for strength, chaos for normalcy, addiction for identity. But underneath it all, we are still wired for kindness, for connection, for community. These are not weaknesses, they are our original design. Maybe the deepest healing doesn't come from striving to be better, but from daring to be real, daring to return to the unfiltered truth of our inner world, and to see that not as broken, but sacred. As Dr. Maté says, don't look to the people in power to save the world. They're often the ones most disconnected from themselves. Instead, find the lamp inside you, be a light unto yourself. And when you do, you might just help this world remember its own humanity. Thank you for being here.